So in my presentation today, I'm going to provide some background information about Lake Winnipeg, our monitoring program, and then provide a data update. And then I will pass it off to Fallon and Chelsea. Everyone here has a unique perspective and experience with the lake and the watershed, so I just wanted to ground us in some facts about the lake. Lake Winnipeg is the 10th largest freshwater lake in the world. It has an extensive watershed spanning almost 1 million square kilometers, over 100 indigenous nations, and about 7 million people. And more than 23,000 people live in 30 communities along the shores of Lake Winnipeg, including 11 First Nations. And Lake Winnipeg, like many large lakes, sustains vital ecological biodiversity, local economies and livelihoods, as well as cultural and spiritual identity. But over the last 30 years or so, Lake Winnipeg's water quality has deteriorated substantially. In particular, algal blooms have become more frequent, severe, and extensive. And the impacts of these algal blooms have environmental, health, and economic implications. These blooms have become more of an issue in Lake Winnipeg, in large part because of excessive phosphorus loading. Simply put, phosphorus reduction is and has been a widely recognized solution to control algal blooms in freshwater lakes. In particular, multi-decadal whole ecosystem research at the International Institute for Sustainable Development Experimental Lakes area has shown the importance of phosphorus as a limiting factor for algal blooms in freshwater lakes. And since the Lake Winnipeg watershed is so extensive, we need to get a better understanding of where the phosphorus is coming from. While federal and provincial data speaks to the contribution of phosphorus from the larger tributaries to Lake Winnipeg, finer resolution is needed. If we're going to effectively target where to conduct remedial action, we really need to understand as specifically as possible which areas tend to export the most phosphorus. And this is where LWF comes in. So in 2016, we launched the Lake Winnipeg Community-Based Monitoring Network, or LWCBMN, a program specifically designed to answer the question of where is the phosphorus coming from. This program generates useful information that can respond to community concerns, support regional decision-making, support scientific research, and target remedial action. Our methods have been developed and refined over the years in partnership with our science advisors. Now beginning its 11th field season, our program mobilizes our regional partners and passionate volunteers, many of whom are in this room, to collect water samples all across Manitoba. And personally, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone involved in this program. We could not do what we do without you. Getting to a field site, being responsive, dealing with roads, with weather, with traffic, collecting water samples, coordinating sample transport, it all takes time and effort. And when I analyze samples in the lab, it's not lost on me that every sample has a person and a story behind it. I analyzed about 3,500 samples just from 2025 alone and have analyzed well over 10,000 at this point myself. That's a lot of samples and a lot of stories, so sincerely thank you. Here's a map showing the location of our 100 sampling sites with data in 2025. With so many sites, as well as the many partners and volunteers who live and work near these locations, it makes it possible for us to have frequent, responsive, and extensive sampling across a large area. And 91 of our sites are located at Water Survey of Canada flow-metered stations. One perk of sampling near these stations is that we can track real-time flow data. This helps us know when to prompt our samplers to take a sample. But the most critical part is that for these sites, we can now pair phosphorus concentration data with stream flow data. This makes it possible for us to better understand how much phosphorus ends up downstream. And here's a graph, just as an example, showing the stream flow, which is the blue line on the bottom, and phosphorus concentration, which are the two lines at the top, just over time. Pairing the data also lets us calculate phosphorus load, which is the amount of phosphorus flowing past a site in a given year. And secondarily, we can calculate phosphorus export, which is the amount of phosphorus exported by each hectare of land. And this is really important as it lets us compare sites despite differences in watershed area. And this is what we use whenever we are talking about hotspots or hotspot maps. I conduct the lab analysis in Dr. Nora Cassin's water quality lab at Winnipeg. We get whole water samples where we can calculate total phosphorus concentration, and filtered water samples where we calculate dissolved phosphorus concentration. We've also been regularly conducting proficiency testing with PT Canada, passing with excellent scores every 6 months for the last several years. And now I get to chat with you about the data. At this gathering last year, we shared the 2023 data with you. Since then, a lot has happened. I won't get into too much detail, but there's been a lot of behind-the-scenes improvements to the way we analyze the data, the structure of the data itself. Perhaps most importantly, we have brought every year of data from 2016 onwards into the same format. Not only does it make it simpler for us to observe and analyze the entirety of the data set, but we feel even more confident in the precision of our data analysis. I've also been very busy in the lab. Not only have I analyzed the 2024 samples, but I also completed analysis of the 2025 samples just about a month ago. And I just wanted to say thank you to Fallon, Chelsea, our team, and all of our partners and water samplers who made sure we could get these samples back as quickly as possible following the field season. So thank you very much. And from now on, we'll be focused on collecting all these samples as quickly as we can during and following field seasons. Doing this means that at the next gathering, at 2027's gathering, we can show you 2026 data. And for the New Year's data, 2024 and 2025, they are all released on Lake Winnipeg data stream as of just a few days ago. And in the past, we have released regional reports with each year of data. Later in this talk, Chelsea will be sharing the new way that we'll be reporting our results. And I'm really excited for you to hear about this. So with that, I just wanted to take a look at the data. In 2016, when the program began, we only had 6 sites. Even then, we were able to detect differences in phosphorus export. And for context, redder areas correspond to higher phosphorus exports or phosphorus hotspots. But from 2016 on, the program began to grow. 10 years later, here we are with around 100 sites, tens of thousands of analyzed samples. From our humble beginning, this program has now become a high-quality, long-term data set. Beyond the ever-strengthening quality of our methods and reporting, the program's development into a long-term one is perhaps the most important part. And the story of phosphorus in Lake Winnipeg is deeply intertwined with the story of water. And as all of you have experienced, the story of water is much different in each year. Some years are dry, some wet, or somewhere in between. What we expect based on the research is what we see in our results. Generally speaking, wetter years like 2019 and 2022, which is this one. Sorry. Yeah. In wetter years, we have much higher phosphorus exports. This is simply because generally when there's more water present, there are more ways for phosphorus on the landscape to become connected to downstream waterways, which drain eventually into Lake Winnipeg. Whereas in dry years, like 2018 and 2021, much less of the landscape sources of phosphorus are able to enter the waterways and thus the lake. But also within individual years, research has shown that we typically see the greatest proportion of phosphorus exported during spring snowmelt. But climate change is resulting in a shift away from spring snowmelt dominance and towards more substantial summer and fall rain events. This is very important, and I will talk about this more as I dive into the 2 New Years of data. But in our data set, we did see that in 2019, one of the wet years with the highest exports, the bulk of the phosphorus exported occurred in the fall as a result of a large rain event. Some of you might remember that year, even in Winnipeg, we had that huge dump of snow in the fall, and then all the trees were having a rough time. But of course, water is not the only factor here, because if it was, we would see a map with a single color in all of the watersheds in a single year. And more work is underway to connect the hotspot data to landscape data. And Chelsea will discuss this a little bit further in her presentation. But generally for now, what we've seen is that we tend to see higher phosphorus exports within the southern Red River Valley, so more on the bottom right side. But since we're releasing these 2 New Years of data, I want to take a bit of time to explore these in a little more detail. 2024 was on the drier side. Generally, it was in the middle, but a little bit drier in some places. But the key here is that in many of the watersheds, particularly on the south and southeast sides of the province within the Red River Corridor, we saw lower than normal proportions of both water and phosphorus load compared with the rest of the year. Typically, we see 70, 80, 90% of the water and phosphorus load happening during the spring months, during the snowmelt. And in this year, a lot more of the water and phosphorus load occurred later in the year. And this appears to be the result primarily of two rain events which occurred in a lot of the sites. So there's one in July and one in September, depends where you were. So in this case, the red line is June 1st. In this year, in this site, 64% of the total phosphorus load occurred after June 1st, which clearly was the result of high concentrations during the July storm. So there's that third blue bump on the bottom. And in this case, again, in a complete reversal from what we expect, almost 90% of the phosphorus load occurred after June 1st. 2025 was a similar year to 2024 on the whole. It was in the middle, on the drier side a little bit as well in some sites, and especially quite dry during the spring. But the timing of phosphorus loading was more similar to what we see historically, with a lot of it happening during the spring. Except there was some rain events that were very significant in some of the regions. So here's an example where the spring snowmelt is what we see on the left side on the blue, and then we had this crazy big storm in some of these sites later on in the year where it went skyrocketing up compared to what we see with the spring snowmelt. And something I want to point out with this too is that we encountered a problem with the data this year that we haven't come across before. So typically, the majority of Water Survey of Canada stations, they turn on March 1st and then they turn off October 31st. And this is largely because of the historical patterns of stream flow in this region. But in this site and many other sites, we had the water levels go way, way, way up with the storms, and then they shut off October 31st. And this means that we might be underreporting how much water and phosphorus loading is actually occurring. So it's something we want to have conversations about in the future, and hopefully we can keep stations on until they are either dry or frozen so that we don't miss any events. Both of these new years of data were comparable when we look at the historical record that we've built so far. And as expected by climate change research, late summer and autumn severe rainstorms are becoming more common. This is likely to remain a significant part of the story in the future, as well as just generally more chaotic weather. And if we continue to see big flushes of water in the fall months, this really highlights the importance of having responsive and frequent sampling, as well as wide coverage. And again, it was not just these 2 years where this happened, we also had this in 2019. So 3 of the last 7 years, we've had in many sites this reversal from historical trends. And it's important we capture what's happening during any of these big rain events, as this is when a lot of the phosphorus is flushed into the waterways. But another aspect is that some farmers may be applying their manure or fertilizer later in the fall. And these can be important sources of phosphorus. So if we see a combination of more of these later rain events combined with that, that could mean a lot more phosphorus ending up in Lake Winnipeg. So monitoring these patterns is really important. And as we look at the 10 years of data once again, I'll finish by just saying that I'm really proud of this work, and I'm really proud of everyone who has been part of it over the years. And for me, it's also very exciting, as Alexis said, to have these 10 years of data cleaned up and released prior to the next field season, to have the backlog done. Now I'll have a lot more time to dig further into the data and the analysis and supporting and participating in all kinds of additional research. And with that, I'll say thank you, and if you have any questions, please feel free to come and chat with me today at any point, or email me at carl@lakewinnipegfoundation.org.
Okay, thanks, Carl. That was awesome. Hi, everybody. I'm Fallon, and I'm the program coordinator here at the Lake Winnipeg Foundation. And I'm really excited to talk with you all a little bit about the network, how it's running this year, how we're supporting all of our volunteers who make it possible, and some of the fun ways that we're celebrating the network as well. So last year, we celebrated 10 field seasons, and this year, we're really focusing on the people who make those seasons possible. The network truly is people-powered. These faces that you see up here represent our volunteers, LWF staff, young scientists, watershed districts, sampling partners, and everybody up there, and all of you who are here today contribute in a really unique way, and it's really the people that make this network what it is. So for me, one of the biggest indicators that this network is working is that people keep coming back. So this year, close to 90% of volunteers returned who had sampled in 2025. Some were new last year, some had been with us for a couple seasons. But what this means is that most of our sites are being sampled by people who already know their watershed, they're familiar with their equipment, the protocols, and their sites as well. As many of the volunteers here know, returning volunteers begin to build what we call site-specific expertise. So they really just become the expert of their site, they know how it responds to heavy rain events, and they really understand when it is the best time to collect a sample. They even pick up little tricks along the way that makes the sampling process smoother. So it's really cool to see that knowledge being built year after year. And we actively support our volunteers and sampling partners to keep them engaged. We provide hands-on training, video resources, and guidance throughout the season. They know they can ask me questions anytime. I'm always available for an email, a text, a call, whatever your preference is works for me. And I believe through that communication and regular check-ins that it really helps people feel connected to the network and confident in their sampling. We also want to show that we truly respect the time that you've also graciously volunteered by making sure that your sampling efforts count. That is why we collect your samples as quickly as possible at the end of the season, just to ensure that they arrive at the lab before our analysis deadline, and it gets included in our data set. We're always looking for ways to build on what works, so ways that we can make things easier for those who are sampling, ways that we can improve processes, and really just finding ways to keep the network strong. So every year we do field audits while volunteers are out sampling. It's a really great chance for us to check in, see things in action, and just make sure that everybody feels like they're set up for success. So a little bit about our field audits. They are designed to look at 3 things. The first is that the sampler is following the protocol as it's intended and that they're completing all of the steps. The second is to check for any variation in the way that a sample is processed. So after collecting a sample, we ask that the bottle is given a really good shake just to ensure everything is well mixed and that the sample is homogeneous prior to completing the sub-sampling. Since we have about 60 individual volunteers, not to mention all of the watershed district staff, everybody's going to be shaking this bottle slightly differently, and not that it's a bad thing, but we acknowledge that there will be some variation, so this part of the audit is set out to understand that. And the third is to check for any phosphorus carryover in the equipment between samples. We have cleaning protocols in place that involves rinsing the sampling equipment prior to sample collection, so this portion of the audit is to test those protocols just for any carryover in the equipment. So to strengthen our auditing process, last year we tried something new to improve the second point that's highlighted here on the screen. We took samples alongside volunteers, so we were able to compare our sample results and their sample results. It was a really small additional step on our end, but gave us a much clearer way to measure and look at that variation. It was a small pool of audits, but the results were really excellent, and we're excited to keep using that approach in 2026. This season, we are also supporting a new study that is going to be looking at trifluoroacetic acid, also known as TFA, a persistent contaminant across the watershed. We are going to be working with Dr. Mark Hansen from the University of Manitoba and Dr. Shira Jordan from the University of Alberta. Mark is here today and will be talking more about why they're interested in TFA, but what this means for the network and the samplers is that there will now be 1 additional sample pack to each kit, and it's to be collected during the first week of May, so it's just 1 sample for the whole season. So if you're a sampler here today, don't worry, I will send out some much clearer instruction about the study in the coming weeks. And of course, staying connected is another important part of building on what already works. So our newsletter keeps everybody updated throughout the season. It is called Sampling Sites, and we send it out monthly from March to November. We also have some really great resources on our YouTube channel, including some presentations from last year's gathering. Dr. Scott Higgins, who is here today, gave a really fantastic talk called Focus on Phosphorus at last year's gathering. It was a really clear and informative video that provides a really great background on the research done at ELA and why we at LWF are focused solely on phosphorus. So if you're new to the network, you didn't get a chance to catch it, we do have it uploaded on YouTube where you can access it. And finally, last year's photo contest winners are on your name tags again. This is just a fun contest we run every year. We advertise it through our newsletter. Just a fun way to showcase the natural beauty of all the different sampling sites and the landscapes that we have across the network. We are also growing the network, bringing on our 17th LWCBMN student. We really value these student positions because not only are they helping support our work, but we're also investing in training the next generation of young scientists. The summer student will be helping with field work and field audits, and will be working closely with volunteers and partners. There's a lot to learn from these positions, and we're just really excited that we're able to continue to offer these kinds of opportunities. We are also still looking for a handful of volunteers to fill the 4 sites that are up there on the slide. One of the main ways we recruit is by reaching out really widely in a community and surrounding communities where we're looking for volunteers. We make specific posters to each region every year and try to connect with local businesses and community groups. They'll often advertise the opportunity either online or in person. Sometimes we see if their staff are interested, but really we cast a wide net, often sending hundreds of emails, hoping to find someone who's interested in our work or who shares a passion for Lake Winnipeg. But some of these communities are a little smaller than others and can be tough. So if you know anybody in these areas who might be interested, please pass along the opportunity. Okay, moving on to a few more celebratory things. In October 2025, LWF received the Water Canada Policy Award, which we're really proud of, and it was really an honor to receive, and it was largely in recognition of the impact of this network. The work that you all do, collecting data and showing up season after season, is helping inform policy and decision-making at higher levels. So when we say that this network makes a difference, it really does, and this award is a huge reflection of that. And just quickly, want to highlight some other fun things that we're doing. So super small touches, but we have stickers in new colors this year. So that was our 10th field season design last year in black. We also have it in blue. And this people-powered graphic is on a postcard. We have both available at the registration table if you want to take one home. They're just little reminders that you're all a part of this network. Okay, and then finally, before we wrap up, I'm sure you all saw it on the way in. It was pretty hard to miss, and it's pretty big, but I want to introduce you to our activity that we have planned for the breaks. So in the foyer by kind of the registration table against the wall, there's a large mural set up to capture the collective voice of this network. So it's an opportunity for you to help us shape what the next 10 years could look like. There are a few prompts to help get your thoughts flowing, a little bit on where we've been and where we are and where we hope to go. There's sticky notes and markers and lots of staff around to help get you set up, but we are a people-powered network, and the voices in this room are a big part of that. So if you have a moment during the break, we'd love for you to add yours and share your perspective, or just check it out and see what other people have been adding. But if you go to put up a sticky note and notice someone else had the same train of thought, please add it again. It is important for us to see if there's an idea that really stands out to the network or is reoccurring. We'll be taking all the ideas back with us, something that we're going to reflect on as a team and share back with the network as well. Okay, well, thank you all so much for listening. I'm so excited to be in our 11th field season together. I will pass it along to Chelsea next. Thank you.
Thank you, Fallon and Carl, and thank you everybody for being here today. I am really excited. My name is Chelsea. I'm the Programs Director at the Lake Winnipeg Foundation, and I'm going to be talking about how the Lake Winnipeg Community-Based Monitoring Network data is being used to improve the health of Lake Winnipeg. We have had some major advancements in data use this year, and I think this is in large part due to a collaborative effort of folks in this room. Every time a researcher references our data in a peer-reviewed study, a graduate student uses our network to collect their own data, or a watershed district uses our data to rationalize a project in a grant application, that builds trust between data users, policymakers, researchers, and our community-generated data. So thank you. I'm going to start by talking about why the network exists in the first place. It exists because two of our science advisors, Dr. Greg McCullough and Mike Staten, who you'll hear from on the science advisor panel later, saw that resources meant to improve the health of Lake Winnipeg were being scattered haphazardly across a vast watershed. And they thought that with higher resolution data, resources and action could be targeted to the areas that needed it most. With this in mind, LWF has been advocating for targeted approaches to funding for phosphorus reduction, specifically from Lake Winnipeg's federal funding program, the Canada Water Agency's Lake Winnipeg Freshwater Ecosystems Initiative. So it felt like a big step forward last fall when the federal funding program, in their call for proposals, prioritized hotspot watersheds, which they identified through a combination of our community-based monitoring network data and a federal watershed model called the Sparrow model. To develop this map, we participated in a federal working group that brought together academic and government scientists, watershed modelers, and other key partners for input. And this collaboration truly underscores the value of the data and the important work that the network does. Because without the community-based monitoring network data, there would have been no empirical monitoring data to inform this decision-making process, and we'd be reliant entirely on modeled estimates. We recognize this map doesn't match perfectly with the empirical data, and we'll continue working with the federal government to refine this process and ensure they have access to the best available information. There's now a new working group underway, the Testbed Watershed Working Group, where the Canada Water Agency is exploring opportunities to target resources to selected watersheds where they can stack beneficial management practices, evaluate those practices with the goal of achieving measurable phosphorus reduction. In this working group, we are advising the use of empirical data to select those watersheds, as well as to measure the cumulative impact of targeted phosphorus reduction activities in the watershed. And we are really excited to have Nicole Mischuk here today to talk more about the Canada Water Agency and the Lake Winnipeg Basin Program later on. This year, the Lake Winnipeg Community-Based Monitoring Network data has also proven to be useful at informing watershed models. Through the Targeted Approach Working Group, I've been learning more about the federal watershed models, and I think the watershed modelers have been learning more about our data. For those who aren't familiar, in the Lake Winnipeg watershed models are commonly developed by extrapolating data to estimate where phosphorus is coming from and how it moves through the watershed. The Sparrow model is one example of this, and it's a model that was designed to estimate and map phosphorus contributions from the watershed. However, it has no calibration stations on the Canadian side of the Red River Valley. So on this map, you won't be able to hear me, I guess. And calibration stations in models are really important because they are the ground truth for a model. They're the real-world monitoring sites where measurements are collected to check and adjust a model. Luckily, though, this is exactly where the Lake Winnipeg Community-Based Monitoring Network has its highest resolution, and the timing works out really well. We were learning about these models in the fall, and they'll be updating the model this year and incorporating Lake Winnipeg Community-Based Monitoring Network data, which means that, and will result in more accurate estimates for the Canadian side of the Red River Valley. Federally, we have also been working with Dr. Yongbo Liu from Environment and Climate Change Canada, who used our data to select a hotspot watershed, the Joubert Creek watershed in the St. Rat-Rosso watershed district. And he used our data to select that hotspot and then is modeling what is happening with phosphorus within that hotspot. Our data is also used by Prairie Watershed Analytics, a model out of the International Institute for Sustainable Development. There is another opportunity for our data to inform a watershed model. In the fall, we submitted a funding proposal in partnership with Dr. David Lobb at the University of Manitoba and Dr. Alex Coiter at Brandon University to update a previously built phosphorus management calculator, which is an accessible Excel-based model that can be used to evaluate the impact of various beneficial management practices on a sub-watershed. When this calculator was initially built in 2018, there was limited high-resolution data available, which meant that it couldn't be applied in that many watersheds. But now, with a decade of the network's high-resolution data available, the calculator can be updated and applied at a broader scale. What's really great about this model is that not only is it grounded in local data, but there's no black box. So without being an expert in modeling, you can see what assumptions are being made and easily update the spreadsheet as new, locally relevant data becomes available. I see a lot of potential uses for this calculator, including by government funding programs to evaluate the phosphorus reduction impact of an application, and also by watershed districts for planning projects. The Lake Winnipeg Community-Based Monitoring Network data is also being used to inform research in the watershed. Doctors Darshani Kumar-Gamage, Nora Kassin, and Inoka Amarakun are assessing and mapping regions with excessive phosphorus loss via snowmelt, and they are focusing most on watersheds identified as hotspots by the Community-Based Monitoring Network data. And we are excited to have Darshani here this afternoon presenting on this research. We are using the data internally to inform our own research. We've been working with our science advisor, Dr. Greg McCullough, on a spatial correlation study to connect what we're measuring on the land what we're measuring in the water with what's occurring on the land. The first question we get asked when people see our hotspot maps is, well, what is going on in those areas that's causing these high phosphorus exports? And that's what we hope this study can begin to answer. We want to understand the land use practices associated with the higher phosphorus exports. We have gathered various phosphorus source data, including data from manure management plans, agricultural census data, wastewater phosphorus data, and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada's phosphorus balance map data. And data analysis has now begun. And Greg will be presenting preliminary results on this research at the International Association for Great Lakes Research Conference at the end of May. And I'm really hopeful that at this gathering next year, we'll have a peer-reviewed study of this work to share with you. Now, looking forward, with 10 years of data and a lot of interannual variation, you might be wondering which year should be used to target resources in action. There are these 10 maps, and they all are a little bit unique. And we've been wondering the same thing, so we are embarking on a data analysis project to analyze all 10 years of data together and understand quantitatively what are the persistent hotspots that appear year after year. There are a lot of considerations to this since the data set isn't perfectly consistent. There are less sites in the early years than in the later years. There are changes in hydrology from year to year. As Carl showed, some years are really dry and some years are really wet. And the drainage areas can shift slightly depending on data availability. So we are exploring the possibility of filling in data gaps using concentration discharge relationships and modeling some of that missing data. We plan to have this data and an overall hotspot ranking map available later this spring. And we see a lot of potential uses for this map and the data behind it, including prioritizing funding to persistent phosphorus hotspots that occur year after year, as well as this data would combine more easily with a lot of the land use data, which often isn't annual data like the agricultural census data. Something else we've begun working on this year is combining our data with phosphorus loading data from other sources. We've always talked about how our data complements the provincially and federally collected data of the major rivers, and we have started to combine our small tributary data with data from the federal government sampling site at the Red River at Emerson, as well as the provincial government sampling site at the Red River at Selkirk, to fill in the remainder of the Red River Valley. We hope to do this for multiple years of data and break it down even further, potentially with data from St. Norbert. To promote data use this year, we will be participating in the International Association of Great Lakes Research Conference here in Winnipeg. We are excited that Drs. Alexis Canoe and Scott Higgins will be providing a plenary speech on the experimental lakes area phosphorus research and how we are using it to inform policy. We'll be co-chairing 2 sessions, one on targeted approaches to phosphorus reduction and another on using community-generated data. And there'll be multiple presentations on the community-based monitoring network data, including Greg's presentation on the spatial correlation analysis. Carl will be presenting on the network and the data, and I'll be talking about data use. One thing that I've learned from working or participating in these working groups is a lot of the work that happens or a lot of the research that happens on Lake Winnipeg and the watershed actually isn't occurring in the watershed, but by folks who do modeling out in Burlington or Waterloo. And so I think it's really important that we elevate our network at the national and international level so that anyone who plans to do phosphorus research in the watershed is aware of our data and knows where to access it. Okay, now that I've covered data use, I'm excited to launch a new online mapping platform that we hope will further enable Lake Winnipeg Community-Based Monitoring Network data use well into the future. If you've been to our gatherings in the past, you were most likely handed a folder with a very thick regional report, which is how we've presented our analyzed data up until now. These reports served their purpose, but we were butting up against some challenges with them. One of those is that the more data that we have, the more interesting it's becoming to compare data across years. And with the annual reports, that was quite challenging. You would have had to have a bunch of reports open in front of you or a bunch open on your desktop. The regional reports also made it challenging to compare between regions. And it was a challenge to update the reports as new information became available. So as Carl mentioned, when the Water Survey releases their approved flow data, that's a time we would like to update the data that we have previously shared. So to address these challenges, we've been working behind the scenes to build a new online platform called Phosphorus Explorer. You can visit it by going to phosphorusexplorer.ca. And this is where you can explore 10 years of Lake Winnipeg Community-Based Monitoring Network data with the click of a button. This fall, we started working with Entremission, a tech consulting firm, to develop this Phosphorus Explorer and to share our data analyses and phosphorus export maps in an interactive way, making it easier than ever to compare across years or across regions and interact with the data at multiple levels. So whether you want to look at that high-level watershed map, whether you work at a regional level and want to compare one watershed district's phosphorus levels to another, or whether you want to dig right into the data, looking at the hydrographs and understanding the water loads and all of that, Phosphorus Explorer should be able to provide you with all of that. This afternoon, Colette Leclerc is going to be taking us through an interactive activity so that we can all get hands-on with Phosphorus Explorer and become more comfortable with it. We also have a booth set up at the front entrance that will have Phosphorus Explorer on the computer, so you can take a look there as well, and Colette and Carl will be there to answer any of your questions. One of the most exciting things about this tool is that we see a lot of potential for continuing to refine and adapt the tool as the program changes into the future. So if you have any feedback on it or any ideas of how we can visualize this data even more clearly, we would love to hear it, and Colette will actually be collecting feedback throughout the day at that booth outside, and we'll provide it back to the LWF team later. Go. And of course, none of this work would be possible without funding, and we are really grateful that the Community-Based Monitoring Network has funders that truly value the long-term nature of this program. So thank you to the Government of Canada, the Royal Bank of Canada, and Manitoba Hydro for their sustained investment in the Community-Based Monitoring Network. And we are also really grateful to our wage subsidy funders, Eco Canada and the United Nations Building Young Professionals program. They allow us to hire co-op students during our busiest time to really increase our capacity during times like the spring melt. And of course, none of this would be possible without our watershed district partners. We work with 12 of the 14 watershed districts in Manitoba, and they help us out and support the network in so many ways. They are on the ground in their communities and have really strong community connections that have been built over many years. So they help us recruit volunteers for sites. They do a lot of sampling themselves, which is, of course, a huge investment of time and resources, and we're really grateful for that. And they can also really help us contextualize the data as the boots on the ground in their communities. Oftentimes we'll see something funny going on when we're doing data analysis, and folks like Chris from St. Rosa Watershed District can usually tell us exactly what was going on at that time and why we're seeing something interesting in the data. And just to finish off, I want to thank everyone here today for being a part of our People Power Network, whether you're a science advisor, a watershed district partner, a volunteer. Everyone plays their unique role, and I think that's what makes this work really meaningful and powerful. So thank you all for being here today, and I will invite Carl and Fallon back up, and we will do our best to answer any of your questions. Thank you. And for the folks online, we would like to provide the people asking questions with a mic. So Shope will be running around. So just raise your hand if you do have a question. Scott.
Yeah, I have a question for Carl. You probably said this, but in 2025, how was the... Oh, thank you. Thank you. So you probably already said this, but for the 2025 data, how were the loads distributed across the season and that sort of cutoff that you had on June 1st?
Yeah, it definitely really depends on the sites. Like I mentioned, there was that later storm we had in some of the sites that we captured in some cases and missed in others with the stations turning off. But it was closer to what we typically see, where the bulk of the water and phosphorus load was still in the spring.
Hi, this room is terrible. There was a period of time when you had to hold samples for a long period of storage before you analyzed them. Do you have any plans to sort of mimic that event, like analyze some samples today and hold them and analyze them a year or two from now, just to add some validity to the data that you collected on those old samples?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's something that, like, since I've started 3 years ago, we're always looking to improve certain aspects of the program. And one of the things that I want to look at for sure is how samples change over the long period of time. Because the testing that we do is great, but it's on samples that they send to us and we test quite quickly, whereas a lot of samples we aren't able to analyze until sometimes, months after. So that's definitely something we want to add to in the future, the quality, like the QA/QC parts of our work. Yeah.
Sabrina over here asks, what data gaps specifically will be looked at to fill?
Sure, I can talk a little bit about that. I think one data gap that we're really focused on, and it's not going to be answered solely by the community-based monitoring network data, but is that source, that understanding of phosphorus sources in the hotspots. There's a lot going on in these watersheds, and so it's challenging to say one thing specifically is causing them, and maybe it isn't one thing specifically, but I think doing more to combine our data with the land use data, like through Greg's spatial correlation analysis, I think that's a real priority for us to begin to be able to understand and talk about what's going on in these areas and what we can do to begin to address these hotspots.
Hi. I was wondering how much you think some of the results might be impacted by sort of individual events of chance. So around Steinbach this year we had those heavy rains, but it just so happened that all the manure spreading was taking place in the sort of 2 weeks before those rainfalls. So you potentially had a lot of phosphorus washed in after those events, but if the rains had occurred at a slightly different time, or the manure spreading had happened at a different time, the results could have been completely different.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely like a big part of the work, and again, like why it's so important for us to be able to be responsive, because we can't just always rely on it being just during the spring snowmelts. And like you said, with the timing of manure spreading, that's definitely very important. So yeah, sometimes those little events can really matter. And so I didn't mention this as much, but part of the process for us QA/QC wise is looking at each individual site in each year and trying to figure out if we think we've missed an event or not. And there are cases where we have, lots of samples maybe from the summer, but we missed a bulk of the snowmelt, or we've missed some really big event in the summer, and those are cases where we've decided to omit that for now. But yeah, those events are sometimes tricky, so yeah.
Can I jump in?
Yes, yeah.
I think too that is the value of the long-term monitoring, because every year there might be these unique circumstances that occur, but when we start to see things occurring like persistently over time, then we might know that this is going to be an ongoing challenge. So if the fall runoff events occur like in 30% of the years going forward, then that might be a time where we need to look at like the timing of manure spreading or something like that to I guess like reduce the risk of runoff if this is something that's like going to be happening more and more frequently. But I think, yeah, tracking those things over the years instead of just drawing a bunch of conclusions from one year, that might be kind of a unique circumstance. Okay. And we'll be around all day, of course, so please come and talk to us about anything in our presentations or otherwise. Thank you.